The night they set me up with my best friend's older sister as a joke, I learned two things. First, people will call cruelty funny if they think the target is too polite to object. Second, some women do not wait to be rescued. They reach across the table, take your hand first, and make the whole room regret laughing. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 33. I manage construction projects for a mid-size firm in Columbus, and I have been best friends with Marcus Hale since our sophomore year of college, when his car broke down outside my dorm, and I happened to have jumper cables and nowhere better to be. That's the whole story of how I became the reliable one. I had jumper cables. After that, I was the guy people called when something broke, when a couch needed moving, when a fourth chair was needed at a dinner table nobody planned around me. I first met Marcus's older sister, Vanessa, 9 years ago, back when I was 24, and she was 30 and freshly divorced, home for a few weeks to regroup before she started over in a new city. I remember she looked at me across the kitchen island at a 4th of July barbecue, sized me up in about 2 seconds, and said, "You're the friend who apologizes for things that aren't his fault." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. She didn't laugh. She just watched me for a second longer than was comfortable, like she'd filed something away, and then she went back to her wine. I thought about that sentence for longer than I'd like to admit. She moved to Chicago not long after. Over the years, I saw her at holidays, at Marcus's wedding, at his divorce 2 years later, at the funeral for their father. Each time she looked a little more finished, a little more like a woman who had stopped explaining herself to people who hadn't earned it. Each time I noticed, I never said anything. She felt like weather you respected from indoors. I never told anyone, not even Marcus, that I'd thought about her more than I had any right to over those years. It felt disloyal somehow, wanting something that belonged, even loosely, to my best friend's family. So I filed it away the way you file away a song you love, but never play in front of people. So when Marcus called me on a Tuesday and said his mom was hosting a totally casual dinner Saturday night for no particular reason, I should have heard the quotation marks in his voice. I didn't. I showed up in a clean shirt with a bottle of red wine I couldn't really afford, and I noticed the extra chair at the end of the table before I noticed anything else. Then I noticed the way Marcus's cousin Priya wouldn't quite look at me when she said hello. Then I noticed his mother saying, too brightly, "Just come in and be open-minded tonight, Danny," which is the kind of sentence that should come with a warning label. Vanessa was already seated when I walked in, a glass of wine in front of her, dark green dress, hair pulled back in a way that made her look like she'd come from somewhere important and hadn't bothered changing. She looked up at me, and something in her face flickered, there and gone, before she said, mild as anything, "Hi, Daniel." "Hi, Vanessa." I sat down across from her because that was the only open seat, and I felt the table go quiet in that specific way. Tables go quiet when everyone already knows the joke, and you're the last one still holding the punchline. Marcus grinned at me from the other end, like he'd just handed me a gift. "So, funny story," he said, and I felt my stomach drop before he'd said a single funny thing. "Mom and I were talking, and we figured, hey, you're both single. You're both, kind of an acquired taste." Laughter around the table, the kind that pretends to be affectionate. "So we thought, why not just put you two together and see what happens?" I felt my face do the thing it does when I'm trying not to let people see that something landed. I've had a lot of practice at that face. I reached for my water glass because my hands needed something to do. "An acquired taste," Vanessa repeated, in a voice so calm it made the room lean in, waiting to see which way she'd take it. "That's an interesting way to describe your own sister, Marcus." "I meant it nice," Marcus said, already backpedaling. The way he does when a joke lands wrong and he realizes it a half second too late. "Like, you're both, particular." "Particular?" Vanessa said again, tasting the word. Then she looked at me. Really looked, the way she had 9 years ago across that kitchen island, like she was deciding something. And then, in front of his whole family, in front of the extra chair, and the too bright laughter and his mother's hopeful, meddling face, Vanessa reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was warm, steadier than I expected, given the current running under the surface of everything else in that room. She didn't look at me when she did it. She looked at the table, at Marcus, at his mother, and she said, "Well, if this was supposed to be a joke, at least give me the best part of it." Then, quieter, almost to herself, but not quite, "You invited him here to laugh at him. I think I'll just sit beside the only man at this table who looks embarrassed for the right reasons." Nobody laughed after that. The silence had a different texture, the kind that follows when someone says something true in a room full of people who'd agreed not to. Before I continue, if you enjoyed this story, I share lots of steamy, uncensored stories on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. Details are in the description and comments. Be careful. It's very, very hot inside. Dinner continued, technically. Plates got passed. Someone refilled the wine. Marcus's mother steered the conversation toward safer waters, like her garden and a cousin's upcoming wedding. But Vanessa's hand stayed near mine on the table, not holding anymore, just close. And every few minutes she'd say something to me under the noise of the larger conversation. Something specific. Something that told me she remembered things about me that nobody else at that table did. "You still doing the thing where you read 3 chapters of a book and then abandon it for 4 months?" she asked at one point, not looking at me, cutting her chicken like it was the most natural question in the world. "How do you even remember that? You told me that 9 years ago." 9. At the barbecue. You said it like you were confessing something shameful. She glanced at me sideways. "It wasn't. It was just true. Most true things about me sound a little shameful out loud. That's because you've spent your whole life apologizing for taking up space," she said. And it wasn't cruel the way she said it. It was just accurate, the way a doctor tells you where it hurts before you've said anything. I remember that about you too. You remember an awful lot about a guy you've seen maybe a dozen times in 9 years. I pay attention to the people worth paying attention to. It's not a long list. She said it plainly, no flirtation in her voice, which somehow made it land harder than if she'd said it softly. Most people at this table are performing something. You've never once performed for me. Even now, embarrassed as you clearly are, you're not performing. That's rare, Daniel. You'd be surprised how rare. I didn't know what to do with that, so I did the thing I always do, which is deflect with a joke. Careful. If you keep saying nice things about me, Marcus is going to think it's contagious. "Marcus," she said, glancing down the table at her brother, who was mid-story about a golf trip, oblivious for the moment to the fact that his joke had already stopped belonging to him, has never once in his life noticed a person's worth until someone else pointed it out to him first. It's a family trait on our father's side. I got the noticing gene. He got the golf handicap. I laughed, a real laugh, and across the table, Vanessa's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wanted to be one. Marcus tried to reclaim the room a couple more times, cracking a joke about how Vanessa was going easy on me, how I should be flattered she was even talking to me, that kind of thing. The kind of joke that's really just a smaller, meaner joke, wearing a bigger one's clothes. But something had shifted. Vanessa would answer him with a single flat sentence that took the air out of whatever he was building, and I found, somewhere between the second glass of wine and the dessert nobody had asked for, that I was sitting up straighter. I said, at one point, when he tried again, "You know, Marcus, I've been jumping your car for 9 years. I think I've earned a night off from being the punchline." I said it lightly, but I meant it, and something in his face told me he heard both parts. After dinner, his mother asked for help carrying the trash out to the bins along the side of the house. And somehow, it was just Vanessa and me standing in the cold, under a porch light that buzzed faintly, breath visible, garbage bags forgotten by our feet for a second because neither of us had said anything yet. "You knew," I said, "about tonight, about the setup." Of course I knew. Marcus told me on the phone yesterday, thinking it was hilarious. He wanted me to play along. And you didn't say no. I didn't say no because I wanted to see who he'd invited. She crossed her arms against the cold, watching me carefully. I wanted to see if it was going to be some poor guy I'd have to be polite to for one uncomfortable dinner. And then I saw it was you, and I thought, well, that's different. I hated that you had to defend me in there, I said, because it had been sitting in my chest all through dinner, sharp and embarrassing. I hated needing it. I didn't take your hand because you needed defending, Daniel. Her voice had an edge now, not unkind, but firm. The kind of firm that corrects you because she respects you enough not to let you get the story wrong. I took your hand because I wanted to. Those are different things. Don't confuse them. I didn't have an answer for that right away. The porch light buzzed. Somewhere inside, someone laughed at something on the television. Okay, I said finally. Noted. Good. The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. Now help me with these bins before my mother sends a search party. That should have been the end of it, a strange charged evening filed away as an anecdote. Instead, 3 days later, she texted me asking if I knew anyone who did small plumbing repairs, because her kitchen sink in the Chicago condo she still hadn't fully unpacked from her recent temporary move back to Columbus was leaking, and Marcus had apparently told her I knew about that stuff, which was generous, but not entirely wrong. I drove over on a Thursday evening with a toolbox I mostly knew how to use and fixed a bad connector under her sink while she sat on the counter above me, handing down tools I hadn't asked for yet, somehow always the right one. You're better at this than Marcus gives you credit for, she said, watching me tighten the last fitting. Marcus gives me credit for jumper cables and moving couches. That's about the ceiling. That bothers you more than you let on. I sat back on my heels and looked up at her. Does it show? Only to someone paying attention. She hopped down off the counter, closer to me than the space really required, and handed me a towel for my hands. I pay attention, Daniel. It's sort of my whole personality. We ended up on her back porch afterward with 2 beers, talking longer than either of us probably intended, about her ex-husband, who had a habit of being generous in public and cold in private, who made her feel, in her words, old before I was allowed to feel anything else, and about my ex, Claire, who left 2 years ago and told me, not unkindly, but not gently either, that I was too safe to build a life around, a sentence I had turned over in my head more times than I wanted to count. Too safe, Vanessa repeated, tasting it the way she'd tasted particular at the dinner table. That's a strange complaint to have about a person. Not if you want fireworks. I had fireworks. My marriage was fireworks. Fireworks burn down houses, Daniel. I'd rather have a foundation. She looked at me for a second too long, the porch light catching the side of her face, and then looked away first, which felt like something coming from her. Over the following weeks, we found reasons. I helped her move a bookshelf. She showed up at a coffee shop near my office because she was in the area, which she wasn't, not really. Not for a woman who lived 40 minutes away. We talked on the phone some nights until well past midnight, about nothing important. Both of us too aware of the silences that stretched a beat too long. Both of us letting them stretch anyway. Once, in her kitchen, reaching past her for a mug, my hand grazed hers on the counter, and neither of us moved for 3 full seconds before she stepped back, cleared her throat, and asked if I wanted coffee, like the moment hadn't happened, though we both knew it had. Once, dropping her off after her car battery died in a grocery store parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, we sat in my truck outside her building longer than we needed to, the engine ticking as it cooled, and I found myself looking at her mouth in a way I had no business doing, and she noticed, and for a second, neither of us pretended not to notice. Then her phone rang, Marcus's name on the screen, and the moment folded itself back up like it had never happened. There was a Sunday morning, a few weeks into whatever we were building, when she showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding 2 coffees and wearing an expression I hadn't seen on her before, something almost shy. I drove past 3 times before I parked, she admitted, handing me a cup. I don't do this. Showing up places uninvited. I plan things. I don't just show up. What changed? I asked, and she looked at me for a long moment on my doorstep, morning light behind her, before she said, I got tired of planning around a feeling I already knew the answer to. We stood there a while longer than the coffee needed to stay warm, neither of us in any hurry to go back inside and turn the morning into something ordinary. Another night, helping her assemble a bookshelf she'd bought secondhand, we sat on her living room floor, surrounded by hardware and instructions written in what might as well have been a foreign language, and she leaned back against the couch and asked, out of nowhere, Why didn't you ever say anything? Back when we first met, I know you noticed me. Don't insult us both by pretending you didn't. I turned an Allen wrench over in my hands, buying myself a second. You were 30 and freshly divorced and about to move to a different city. I was 24 and had nothing to offer except jumper cables and a crush I didn't think I was allowed to have. Allowed, she repeated. That's an interesting word. You were Marcus's sister. It felt like coveting something that belonged to the family, not to me. And you were so far out of my league, it didn't even feel like longing. It felt more like admiring a painting in a museum. You don't try to take it home. That's a very sad way to think about wanting someone. It's a very accurate way, I said, and she didn't argue, just looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't quite name, something between sympathy and recognition, like she'd lived a version of that same sentence from the other direction. Another evening, she called me at almost 1 a.m, her voice a little rough with something that wasn't tiredness. I can't sleep, she said. Talk to me about something boring. Tell me about a construction project. Tell me about rebar. So I did, for 20 minutes, about a parking structure I was managing downtown, about concrete cure times and inspection schedules. And she listened, actually listened, occasionally asking a question that proved she was following along. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized we'd been on the phone for almost an hour, and neither of us had mentioned hanging up. Better? I asked eventually. Much, she said. Good night, Daniel. She didn't hang up right away. Neither did I. It became a small ritual after that, those late calls, half of them about nothing, half of them circling closer to something neither of us was ready to name out loud. There was one night, a few weeks in, when we almost stopped pretending entirely. She'd invited me over for what she called a practical dinner, which turned out to mean she'd cooked more food than 2 people could reasonably eat, and lit candles she then pretended were left over from a dinner party. We ate at her small kitchen table, close enough that our knees kept brushing, and afterward, washing dishes together, our hands wet and soapy, sleeves pushed up. She went very still when I reached past her to set a plate in the drying rack, my arm brushing the length of hers. Neither of us moved for a long moment. The water was still running. Somewhere, a clock ticked. I could feel her breathing change, could feel my own doing the same thing. And when I turned my head, her face was close enough that I could see the small scar above her eyebrow I'd never noticed before, could see her eyes drop, just once, to my mouth. Daniel, she said. And it wasn't a warning. It was almost a question, an invitation dressed up as hesitation. That was the exact moment my phone rang on the counter, loud and sudden in the quiet kitchen, Marcus's name lighting up the screen, as if some cosmic joke had decided we weren't allowed that moment yet. Vanessa stepped back first, turning off the faucet with more focus than the task required, and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound normal, "You should probably get that." I didn't answer it. I let it ring out. But the moment had already folded itself closed, carefully, deliberately, both of us aware of exactly what we were choosing not to do yet, and why. It was Marcus who eventually put it together, the way people who aren't paying close attention sometimes suddenly are. He showed up at my apartment on a Sunday, agitated in a way I'd rarely seen from him, and said, without preamble, "Are you sleeping with my sister?" "No," I said, which was true, technically, and felt like the smallest part of the truth. "But something's happening. Don't lie to me, Danny. I've known you 15 years. I can tell when you're doing the thing where you get quiet because you're hiding something." I didn't say anything for a second, and that silence told him more than any sentence could have. "Jesus," he said, sitting down hard on my couch like his legs had given out. "Come on, you know she was just being nice that night. You seriously think my sister would want you? Like, actually want you?" He said it fast, the way people say cruel things when they're panicking, and I watched something in his face catch up to his own words about half a second after they left his mouth, watched him realize what he just said and to whom. It landed anyway. It landed exactly the way it was built to land, in the soft place where 9 years of jumper cables and couch moving and being the safe backup guy had worn a groove. For a second, neither of us said anything. The apartment felt very small. I thought about all the times I'd shown up for him without being asked twice. The flat tire on the highway at 2 in the morning, the boxes I'd carried during his divorce when he couldn't bring himself to touch his own furniture, the countless small invisible favors that never made it into any story anyone told about our friendship because they weren't dramatic enough to remember. I thought about how easy it had been for him to say the word, "actually," like it wasn't even a question. "That's what you actually think of me," I said quietly, after 15 years. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant. You just said it faster than you usually let yourself." I sat down across from him, tired, not angry, or angry in a way that had gone cold and clear instead of hot. "You've been telling that joke about me for years, Marcus. The safe one, the dependable one. You didn't think there was anything under it worth wanting." He didn't have an answer. He left angrier at himself than at me, though it would take him a while to sort out which. Vanessa called that night, before I'd even decided whether to tell her. "He called me," she said some things, about you, about us. Her voice was tight in a way I hadn't heard from her before. "I want you to know I told him exactly where he could put his opinion of who I'm allowed to want. I don't want to be the reason you and your brother stop." Not sharp, but absolute. "I am not your rebellion, Daniel. I am not your revenge on a friend who underestimated you, and I am not proof that you're desirable now that someone's finally noticed. If that's what this is for you, tell me now, because I've spent enough of my life being a woman men used to prove something about themselves. My ex-husband used to introduce me at parties like I was an achievement he'd unlocked." She went on, quieter now, the anger burning down into something more tired and more honest. "Look what I landed. Look how impressive she is. And then at home, he needed me to be smaller, softer, less than the version he showed off. I am so tired of being useful to men's stories about themselves, Daniel. I need to know that isn't what I am to you before this goes any further, because I don't think I survive it a second time." I understood then that this was the real question underneath everything, the one she hadn't asked directly until now, and that how I answered it mattered more than anything I'd said to her all these weeks. "That's not what you are." I said it before I'd fully thought it through, which somehow made it more true. "You're the first person in years who looked at me and didn't need me to be useful first. I've spent my whole life being handy, being the guy with the cables and the toolbox and the extra chair. You're the only one who ever asked what I actually think, what I actually want, like the answer mattered on its own." I stopped, throat tight. "I don't want to be your rebellion either. I don't want to be anyone's consolation prize. I just want to be the thing you choose on a normal Tuesday when nobody's watching and there's no joke to prove wrong." There was a long quiet on the line. "Come over," she said finally. I did. She opened the door before I'd finished knocking, and we stood in her doorway for a second, just looking at each other, all the careful distance we'd been keeping finally used up. Neither of us said anything clever. She reached up and touched my jaw, the way you'd check something was really there, and I leaned into it before I could decide whether that was a good idea. And then I kissed her, or she kissed me. It honestly happened at the same moment from both directions. Careful at first, and then not careful at all. Her hand fisting in the front of my shirt, like she'd been waiting to do that for longer than the last few weeks. It didn't feel like winning an argument or claiming a prize. It felt like the end of a long, quiet negotiation neither of us had admitted we were having. We pulled back eventually, foreheads together, both a little unsteady. "That's inconvenient," she said, breathless. And I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like days. Extremely. My brother is going to be insufferable about this eventually, once he stops being an idiot about it. I can live with insufferable. I've had 15 years of practice. She pulled me inside and the door closed, and whatever happened after that stayed between us, quiet and unhurried and entirely ours. The kind of night that doesn't need narrating to matter. We didn't rush after that. We took it slow on purpose, the two of us, like people who understood exactly what could be broken if we didn't. Marcus took 3 weeks to come around, 3 weeks of stiff phone calls, and one deeply uncomfortable lunch where he apologized in the clumsy, incomplete way men apologize when they're more embarrassed than sorry. But it was something, and I took it because 15 years is worth a little patience. "I didn't know you felt like that," he said at that lunch, turning his water glass in slow circles. "About the joke thing. I thought you didn't mind." "I minded. I just got good at not showing it." "That's worse, actually." "Yeah," I said. "I'm working on that." He was quiet for a while, picking at the edge of his napkin. "For what it's worth," he said eventually, not quite looking at me. "I've never actually thought you were dull. I think I just got used to you being the guy who shows up, and somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing that as something rare and started seeing it as something owed to me. That's on me, not you." "I know you didn't mean it the way it landed." "I meant enough of it that it should scare me," he admitted. "The fact that it was even in there to say. That's the part I've been sitting with." He looked up at me finally. "She's happier than I've seen her in years, by the way? In case you were wondering whether I noticed that part too." "I noticed you noticing," I said, and something eased between us for the first time since that Sunday in my apartment. Not fully healed, but on its way, the way most real friendships mend, unevenly and without ceremony. Vanessa's mother, for her part, adjusted faster than any of us expected, mostly because she seemed delighted that her matchmaking scheme, however cruelly framed, had actually worked, a fact she brought up at every subsequent family gathering with a smugness none of us had the heart to correct. Months passed. Vanessa decided, slowly, to make her move back to Columbus permanent instead of temporary, a decision she framed to her family as being closer to her mother and framed to me, late one night with her head on my chest, as simply wanting to be somewhere I was. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, mostly. Not entirely. Old grooves don't disappear. They just get worn less deep over time. And she was patient with the process in a way that never once felt like pity. There were adjustments neither of us fully expected. She caught herself, some nights, retreating into the composed, guarded version of herself she'd built after her marriage. And I learned not to chase that version away with reassurance, but to just stay steady until she came back out on her own. I caught myself, some days, slipping into old habits, offering to fix things nobody had asked me to fix, apologizing for opinions nobody had challenged, and she learned to notice it gently without making me feel exposed for it. "You don't have to earn your seat at this table," she told me once, months in, over a quiet dinner that had nothing to prove. "You already have one. You've had one for years. You just never let yourself sit all the way down in it." I thought about that for days afterward, the way I'd once thought about particular and acquired taste, except this one didn't sting. It settled. I learned things about her, too, in that slower unfolding way real intimacy actually works. Nothing like the dramatic reveal people expect from stories. I learned she hummed off key when she cooked and pretended she didn't. I learned she kept a folder of unsent, unfinished emails to her ex-husband that she never opened but never deleted either. And one night, she finally showed them to me, not for advice, just so I would know that part of her too. I learned she cried harder at other people's happiness than her own, as though joy landing on someone else felt safer to fully feel. I loved her for all of it, quietly and without needing to announce the moment it became love, because by the time I noticed, it had already been true for a while. At Thanksgiving that year, back at the same table, in the same house, with the same too bright porch light outside, someone, a cousin who hadn't gotten the memo, made an awkward joke about Vanessa, finally settling for the safe one, a clumsy echo of the old joke that used to define me at that table. The room went quiet the way it had that first night, waiting to see how it would land. This time, I didn't wait for anyone to reach for my hand first. I reached across the table and took hers, steady, unhurried, in front of everyone, and I said, mild as anything, echoing her own words back to her from that first night. If this was supposed to be a joke, at least you got the best part of it. Vanessa looked at me, something bright and unguarded moving across her face, and laced her fingers through mine like she'd been waiting all evening for exactly that. The cousin who'd made the joke went red and mumbled something about not meaning it that way, the exact words Marcus had used all those months ago, and I found myself feeling something close to sympathy for him, because I understood now how easy it was to say a careless thing without weighing what it cost the person on the other end. Marcus, for his part, caught my eye from across the table and gave a small, rueful shake of his head, an acknowledgement that needed no further translation between two men who'd known each other 15 years. Later, out on that same porch, under that same buzzing light, Vanessa leaned against the railing with a mug of coffee, warming her hands, watching the yard go dark at the edges. "Do you ever think about how differently tonight could have gone?" she asked. "If I hadn't reached for your hand that first time, if you'd just sat there and taken it." "I think about it sometimes," I admitted. "I don't love the version of me who might have just sat there." "I do," she said, surprising me. "Because that version of you is exactly who I noticed 9 years ago across a kitchen island, steady even when the room wasn't being kind to him. I didn't fall for a man who suddenly became interesting the night I took his hand, Daniel. I fell for the man who was always interesting and never got told so by anyone who mattered. I didn't have a joke ready for that for once, so I didn't reach for one. I just pulled her in against me, her back to my chest, both of us facing the dark yard and the fire pit someone had lit earlier, embers settling into themselves the way most true things eventually do, quietly, without needing an audience. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. The joke had finally run out of places to hide, and what was left in its place, warm and steady and entirely ours, felt like the truest thing either of us had ever let a room witness.